this wallpaper is by far the most recognizable wallpaper in the world. In fact, this wallpaper may be the most viewed and potentially most nostalgic photo of all time. Whether you're a casual computer user who just uses computers to check emails, or you're a PC enthusiast who loves to build your own water-cooled systems, this wallpaper unites us all. And it's not something that we just recognize either. It's a blast to the past, a reminder of the revolution that computers are. But there's been several revolutionary launches since then, but none of those wallpapers are anywhere near as recognizable or nostalgic. For example, this was the wallpaper that Steve Jobs used in the original iPhone keynote in 2007, but unless you're an Apple fanboy, you probably didn't even know that. And as for Android, has there ever even been a wallpaper that was iconic for the OS? I would say the answer is no. But what makes Windows XP even more interesting is that it wasn't even the first OS from Microsoft. In fact, it didn't come out till 16 years after the original version of Windows. Before Windows XP, there was Windows 1.0, 2.0, OS 2, 3.1, NT 3.x, 95, NT 4.0, 98, 2000, and me. So Windows XP was actually the 12th iteration of Windows, and there's been plenty since then as well. This includes Windows Vista, 7, 8, 10, and most recently 11. But despite all these new versions of Windows, XP still remains the OG. Coincidentally, the iPhone is at the same age right now as Windows was when XP came out. So that wallpaper going viral is similar to an iPhone 15 wallpaper going viral and then being remembered for decades. I don't know about you, but I don't think the iPhone 15 itself will be remembered in a few decades, much less its bubbly wallpapers. Anyway, it didn't seem like XP would be a game changer at launch either. In fact, the cards were very much stacked against Microsoft from all fronts. So join me as we take a look back at what made Windows XP beat the odds and basically become the symbol of computers. Given the success of XP, you would probably be inclined to think that XP came out during the peak of Microsoft, during a time when everyone was excited about Microsoft and Windows and computers. This sort of situation is what usually leads to such nostalgia. For example, when Gmail, YouTube, and Chrome came out, most people were rooting for Google. Google was the internet company of the people, but the same could not be said about Microsoft. In fact, it was actually quite the opposite. You see, Microsoft was caught up in one of the most influential court cases of all time, United States versus Microsoft. Essentially, regulators were claiming that Microsoft was a monopoly, which they definitely were. Regulators were hoping to split the company into two, one that was in charge of producing operating systems, and one that was in charge of producing all other pieces of software like Office and Internet Explorer. In fact, the only reason that this motion did not go through is because of a technical legal violation. The judge that was overseeing the case had talked with the press while the case was still ongoing, which was a violation of conduct, nullifying the subsequent ruling. So instead of being broken up, Microsoft would end up settling with the DOJ on November 2nd, 2001. But while Microsoft had narrowly avoided a breakup, this only made public sentiment around Microsoft even worse. And this was the context in which Windows XP was launched. In fact, XP was launched on November 25th, 2001, so just 1 week before the settlement, during which consumer sentiment against Microsoft was worse than ever. To make things worse, Microsoft was becoming a lot stricter with their anti-piracy policy. XP was the first version that required Windows product activation, which just rubbed people the wrong way as it just made Microsoft look greedy, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. You know how Apple gets a bunch of slack for not allowing users to customize their products? With the Mac Studio, for example, if you swap out the SSD, the computer will no longer boot. If you ask Apple, they'll say that this is a security feature that ensures that the data on the SSD is safe. But in reality, it's just a way to force people to come to Apple if they want to upgrade storage. Coming from Apple though, this is really not surprising. But did you know that Microsoft was doing the exact same thing over 20 years ago? That's right, XP was dependent on the specific motherboard chipset that it was originally installed with to boot. So if you swapped hard drives, the computer would no longer boot. The only logical reason for this was to force consumers to buy a new Windows license with each computer. So basically, people were dealing with a Google-style monopoly with the anti-consumer practices of Apple. This was the context in which XP was launched, but it wasn't just the context that wasn't optimal. XP itself came with a lot of shortcomings like bloatware. This was actually the main reason for the antitrust lawsuit in the first place. Microsoft was leveraging their OS monopoly to push crappy software like Internet Explorer and MSN Messenger. This effectively killed the competition within the browser space from players like Netscape, but not only was XP filled with bloatware, it was also filled with major security risks. Remember how computer viruses were a serious concern back in the early 2000s? Well, a lot of that is thanks to the security of XP, or I guess lack thereof. We can really get into the weeds of this one, but essentially, Microsoft went ahead and connected XP computers directly to the internet with their TCP/IP protocol instead of having some sort of security layer in between. This was despite several expert warnings months before XP even came out. And what was the result of all of this? Well, XP became a virus magnet. So, to sum things up, XP came out from a widely hidden monopoly and was filled with bloatware and fundamental security issues. You would think that such a combination would lead to a disgraced OS like Windows 8, but somehow XP would go on to be the most nostalgic OS of all time. So, what in the world happened? I know we've largely been trashing on XP and Microsoft so far, but there's a lot of great things to say about XP as well, starting with its UI. Not only was XP easy to use, but it was the first OS that seemed appealing to use. I mean, until XP, this is how Windows looked. The taskbar was gray, the windows were gray, the entire OS was gray. This is because the main focus until XP was functionality, not aesthetics. People bought computers to draft documents, research, learn coding, and send emails, not to mess around with it. Moreover, Microsoft had their plates full with building out functionality itself. But by the time that we got to XP though, Microsoft was able to focus on the UI side of things as well, making computers inviting to use. Now of course, XP is nothing in comparison to 2023 standards, but for 2001 standards, this was revolutionary. Computers had also made massive strides in terms of stability. Yes, they were still very much prone to viruses, but the OS itself was more stable than ever. I could go on to point out a bunch of other advantages of XP as well, but honestly, I don't think the success of XP had anything to do with XP itself. Sure, it was a decently stable OS with a friendly UI and nice colors, but the real reason that XP was so successful was because of a larger trend. Take a look at this graph of annual PC shipments, for example. You can almost see the different market segments. Between 1981 and 1992, you have the geek era. During this period, it was only the hardcore nerds and geeks that used computers. The type of people who learn coding for fun and like building PCs in their spare time. Between 1992 and 2002, you have the early adopter era. These people weren't necessarily super into computers per se, but they could see that computers were the next big thing. They saw that you could use computers to communicate, research, and learn more than ever, and they wanted to be ahead of the curve. And then finally, you have the 2002 to 2010 era. This was when the general public finally bought into the idea of computers, and more importantly, the internet. They saw that you could ask Google any question you wanted and learn about any topic. They saw that you could talk to your family across the world through Hotmail, Gmail, and eventually Skype. They saw that you could keep in touch with your friends like never before with Friendster, MySpace, and Facebook. Most importantly though, they too saw that computers were an essential part of the future. And it was really all of these internet-based services that sold the vision to the general public. It wasn't just people that were coming to this realization either. It was also schools, companies, and governments. All of a sudden, elementary schools started sporting computer labs, old school companies started building IT departments, and government organizations started assembling crappy, yet functional websites. All of this led to computer sales rocketing from 150 million per year to 350 million per year. And what did all of these computers have in common? You guessed it, they shipped with XP. But this insane wave of computer adoption only tells half the story. You see, XP wouldn't be nearly as iconic if it wasn't for the subsequent fall. Heading over to the post-2010 era, you'll see that PC shipments started falling like a rock. We would see a surge during the pandemic, but that's already starting to wear off. The reason for this isn't rocket science. It's because smartphones started taking off, which largely reduced the need for computers. And this had a very interesting impact on the role of computers. People didn't just get rid of their computers or anything, but computers largely became relegated into being a productivity tool. Most people started using computers to solely do job-related work or school-related work. This includes writing emails, attending Zoom meetings, working on Excel sheets, making presentations, writing code, and so on. All forms of tech-based entertainment have moved over to smartphones. This includes texting, social media, video calls, shopping, listening to music, playing mobile games, and even watching YouTube. In fact, almost 2/3 of all YouTube watch time comes from mobile devices. Likely the only exception to this trend is PC gaming. For everyone else though, computers have mainly become a productivity tool. This is in stark contrast to the early 2000s when computers had nothing to do with most people's jobs. People tended to buy computers as a personal device for emailing their friends and social media as opposed to a work device. So it was only natural that people had a greater emotional connection to the defining aspects of early 2000s computers, which happened to be Windows XP and this wallpaper. As computers became work devices though, a lot of that connection wore off, and that's why people don't have the same nostalgia towards Windows 7 or Windows 10. As for the people whose jobs never became computerized, well, many of these people either never upgraded or waited a super long time before upgrading. In fact, when Microsoft discontinued XP in 2014, 3 in 10 computer users were still using XP, which translated to 250 million people. Over 20 years after its launch, millions of people are still using XP. So for a lot of computer users, XP was simply the OS that they used for the longest time, making it a classic. And all of that brings us back to the original question: what makes Windows XP so nostalgic? Well, XP was by no means the perfect OS, nor was it launched under the perfect circumstances. In fact, the circumstances for Microsoft were far from perfect. The circumstances for the PC industry as a whole, however, were better than ever. And for a substantial portion of the population, the glory days of using computers for entertainment ended up being the XP days, and XP is often the OS they used for the longest time. And that's why this wallpaper is so nostalgic. I guess it's a good thing that Microsoft didn't cheap out and spent over $100 grand getting this photo. While Microsoft's foray into the PC world played out extremely well, the same cannot be said about their smartphone ambitions. Check out this video to learn more, but until then, I'm Hari, and I'll see you guys on the next one.